Last summer, on a nice day, I made a little video about sailing my boat to windward. She's a 44-foot cutter. She's got a long keel. She was built in the 1980s and she's anything but state-of-the-art. And working her best upwind has, well, a particular technique that works for her. As I was watching the video just now, I realised that there are so many different techniques for so many different sorts of boats that it's worth having a few thoughts about that. So for what it's worth, here we go. If you're sailing a planing dinghy to windward, I don't know about the very modern dinghies where everybody's sat out on a wire or on a great big long seat or something, but the sort of boats I used to sail were Firefly dinghies, Ospreys, boats like that. If you're on the helm of that boat, essentially what goes on is this. In a decent breeze, the important thing is to keep the boat reasonably flat as she's going upwind. So you strap the jib in hard, you keep an eye on that, and you've got the main sheet in your hand and the tiller on an extension. You're hiked out and away you go, upwind. You're essentially sailing the boat upwind on the jib. The main is powering the boat up, and if the wind drops a bit light, before you come in off the rail, the first thing you do is whack on a bit of main sheet to power the boat up. If she starts heeling too much, before you come in, it's often easier just to let the main sheet go down the traver a little way and keep her on her feet, and that way she'll keep driving upwind all the time. You're watching the jib, but essentially you're feeling the boat. You're actually feeling her to windward, and you know when you've stuffed her up too high because the jib luff starts to come in, she comes upright and the crew starts cursing because he's hanging out, and nobody likes it. So that's the way it works. It's a compound thing. Later in my life, I raced some quite serious boats in the 1980s. And I actually got paid for doing that, believe it or not. And with those boats, the boat that I sailed most at that time was what was called an IOR 3/4 tonner. That makes her a 36, 37-foot boat with a full crew. And sailing her upwind, again, the technique was not dissimilar to a dinghy. She was a big, wide, flat-bottomed boat with a keel and amazing rig, actually, but that's another story. And what we'd do, we'd get the jib pretty well flattened in. She had telltales up the luff of the jib. I'd be sat on the weather quarter, either with a wheel or a tiller, and I'd be watching those telltales like a hawk. And in reasonable conditions, I could sail that boat so high that the weather telltales would be flicking up. Again, the balance of the boat and the power was coming from the bloke who was on the main sheet traveller. We'd set up the main the way we wanted it, we'd sculpted it into shape with our kicker and vang and all sorts of things, and then the guy on the traveller trimmed it. And if the boat heeled over too much, he'd let the traveller go down a little way. The main would backwind a bit, but it didn't matter because the boat was still powering upwind with the jib and the leech of the main, and as soon as things started dropping off again, which could happen in seconds, up came the traveller again. Meanwhile, the lads are all sitting up on the weather rail, cursing the skipper. But, you know, that's how it goes. And we did well like that. We were pretty effective upwind on that boat. I remember it well. What fun we had. Now then, at the other end of the scale, a square rigger. What happens on there? Well, that's very, very interesting because, as in all boats, on a square rigger, the rig should twist towards the top. To get the best out of the wind, about the wind shear as the wind velocity changes as it goes up. And the result of this is that the lower sails, the courses and the topsails are set in such a way that they're dragging absolutely every ounce of meat that the wind's got to get. The upper sails, the topgallants and maybe the royal, are set a bit shyer, so the whole rig appears to be slightly twisted round. And if you come too close to the wind, or the wind backs a bit, the first thing you'll see is the leech of the royal just starting to shiver, or you might call it the luff. The upwind side of the sail will start to luff, and then the helmsman will wind a few spokes on the wheel, the boat will majestically bear away a little bit, and she'll power on through whatever seas are coming. And as of course as you shorten down, it'll be the upper sail, whichever one it is. That's the way it works on a square rigger. In a gaffer, and I've sailed thousands and thousands of miles in pilot cutters, the trick there is to keep the boat footing. You need speed. Never mind trying to point too high, because a good gaffer, not so much a yacht perhaps, but a gaff-rigged working boat will point higher than she will sail. And my old boat, the big pilot cutter from 1911, which was a wonderful sailing boat, built without an engine, absolutely fantastic. She would point 45 degrees on a good day, but she wouldn't go. At 45 degrees, she'd be probably doing 4 knots and making leeway. crack her off to 50 degrees, 52, 53 maybe, and off she went. 6 knots, very little leeway, 7 or 8 degrees, and powering away. And believe you me, if you're doing 6 knots at 55 degrees off the wind, you're making an awful lot more ground to windward than you are at 4 knots, 45 degrees, and going sideways into the bargain. So the trick there was to crack her off and let her go. So what about my cruising boat? Well, with her, it's a sort of cross really between the race boats and the gaffers. I set everything up so it's sailing well, and we take it from there. Here we go, on board the boat. Well, nice of you to join me. I'm sailing here along the coast of Denmark in really very light winds. We've got 8 knots of wind at the moment, which is, well, not a great deal for a heavy boat like mine, but she's doing very nicely. We're close hauled, we've got a foul current, and we're beating south down the, basically down the Great Belt in Denmark. Flat water, absolutely lovely. I'm having a grand afternoon, and I've got my boat set up so that I don't have to do very much really. I've set my rig up the way I like it. Everything's singing really. Looking up the luff of the Genoa, the telltales are behaving themselves pretty well. They're starting to lift a little bit at the top, which implies that I might be able to do something with my fair lead, but not a lot. We're not in a race boat, so I think that's okay. Looking up the leach of the main's an absolute pleasure. All the telltales are streaming off. I've got a nice bit of twist built in there, and it's working nicely. And I've got the whole shooting match set up on my autopilot so that the boat is sailing on the apparent wind angle. I haven't set a compass course, I've set it to sail by the wind, and that's just making it great because it means I can completely relax. I've got it set up where I want it. My apparent wind angle is about 37 degrees, which if you go racing might not sound very much to you, but this is a long keel cruising boat. There isn't much breeze, she's not going to point very high, but she's sailing very sweetly, boat speed about 4.5 knots, and speed over the ground's down to less than 4 because of the foul current, but it's really relaxing because I can just let the instruments do it for me. Normally I'd be sitting down here steering away, watching the telltales, screwing my eyes up into the sun, and very often it's nice to do that. I love to go sailing, but right now I'm feeling pretty idle. I've just had a jolly good lunch, tuna roll and a nice bit of corned beef. I opened the can and oh, nice old-fashioned thing, a tin of corned beef. The way it comes out of the can, it's a very well-designed thing. It sort of sprays out at the bottom so that when you take the lid off it falls out. Try doing that with a can of Spam. They haven't worked it out at all. Anyway, that's not what we're meant to be talking about. We're talking about sailing the boat. And really, that's it. The great joy of this is that I'm making full use of my instruments, and this is a new thing because I never quite got the autopilot set up to my liking last year, and I couldn't quite get it working on the wind. And this year, I didn't rely on the experts, I did it myself, and there's a lot to be said for that, and it's working an absolute treat. The boat's singing, and so am I. So there you go.